Tua will start, but no Penix against Miami? What does this mean for the QB1 battle? Who's going to start week 1? And why is his name Jack Strand?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast. I am your humble host, Aaron Freeman. Been covering the Atlanta Falcons for 2 decades. Spent one of those decades as the illustrious host of Locked On Falcons. And today we are joined by none other than Daniel Flick, Falcons beat writer for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, coming at you guys on the final day of training camp. We'll be talking, of course, all about the quarterbacks and how they shined today on practice. Better late than never, I guess it comes to that. We'll talk about this upcoming preseason game and, Tua starting, Penix not, other players that we'll keep our eye on in this preseason action to wrap up the summer. And, of course, just want to weigh in on where these rookies are at, as we may see the debut of at least one of them on Friday against the Dolphins. But Daniel, my friend, welcome back to the show, and congratulations on completing your first training camp as the beat writer of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. So, how did it go?
Oh man, Aaron, it was great. Happy to hop on with you. Definitely was a good time. It went very fast because everybody warned me that it would, to be there for the entirety of training camp, because I've been there for half of it before and then had to head back to Indiana. So this was the very first year that I'd done all of it, and it went so fast, and so it was good. But there's no way else that I would rather spend my July to August time period, right? I mean, it's unbelievable.
Let's talk about the quarterbacks. And let's talk first about the news of the day, which is that we will not see Michael Penix on Friday. We will see Tua Tagovailoa, who will start that game, and then he'll be followed by Cooper Rush. Who would then be, closing off by, the people's quarterback, Jack Strand. And, I think Penix not playing in this game is not a surprise to my everydayers and my audience, just because we've spent so much time over the last week basically talking about that as a possibility, if not probability, that he would not play against the Dolphins. But I'm curious, what do you make of that decision?
Yeah, the part that I'm not sure surprised me, but that I appreciated, was Michael being very transparent today and saying, no, I didn't want to play. It's not one of those deals where he was out there like advocating for himself and of the approach, like, man, if I don't get to play now, I'm not gonna get to start week 1. Like he was very open about, I don't think I'm ready for it yet. But he's also been open about, hey, I think I will be ready by September 13th, I believe, is when week 1 is. So like, I think you have to appreciate that from his point of view. Yeah, I'll be curious to see how much they let Tua play. It wouldn't shock me if he ends up playing 3 drives, if it ends up being more than what he had against the Broncos. If it ends up being 1 drive, we'll see. I do think they would probably like to get that unit as much work as they can in a live game setting, just because they weren't very good, obviously, against the Broncos. They were very up and down against the Colts. I think the more you can get, the more it'll help you. So I think that part of it makes sense, and I do think it's good you're not going to rush Mike back either. So that was kind of how I viewed it. I wasn't necessarily surprised that he won't play, especially because you could kind of see yesterday and today, whenever they do their scout looks, like whenever their offense would face what they viewed as like Miami's conceptual defense, they wouldn't really put Mike in there. So I kind of had the assumption, it kind of explains some of the snap count, like the margin and snap count, I would say. So that part made sense to me, and it wasn't necessarily a surprise, but I don't know how much it'll hurt Mike long term, but it seems like that's what he wanted. So it's as long as him and the team are on the same page, then you got to be kind of okay with how it turned out, right?
Yeah, I think so. And that piggybacks on something Michael Penix said when he was on Cam Newton's podcast a couple of weeks ago, where they had a in-depth conversation about you play when you're ready to play, and if he's not ready to play right now, then he's not ready to play. So we will see if and when he's ready to play, and that could include him being the week 1 starter, which, I'll ask you in a second, Daniel, who do you think will start week 1, which is the question of the summer. But, in the situation where Michael Penix is that starter, if that is the case, the question I asked you is, do you think that will be because Michael Penix went out there and won the job, or is it more that Tua lost the job? Because I've seen various people over the last 48 hours kind of frame it that way, that Tua's kind of lost the job.
I think the way I would answer that is that Tua has, over the last month, probably not capitalized in full on the opportunity that he had to win the job outright. So I'm not sure how it'll end entirely, obviously, but I don't think it's fair to say inherently that he lost the job. I do think he failed to capitalize. He had a month here where he was the only of the two of them. He was the one doing all the 11-on-11 reps. He was the one that played in the preseason game. He's the one that played all the team snaps against Indianapolis. You have a chance in those moments to leave no doubt, right? And he really left a lot of doubt, actually. So he did quite the opposite. So I don't think Tua has helped. I think he had the opportunity to win the job in training camp outright, and he didn't really grab it by the horns. Now, that said, I think Michael has come back at a time where, with that being said about Tua, Michael can go win the job. So if Michael ends up being the week 1 starter, then I'm going to assume that means that at practice next week that Michael is hands down a better player. It looks better in their offense. We don't actually get to watch anything that happens next week. The next practice we see will be Wednesday leading into week 1, so 2 weeks from today. But I think what Tua's last month did is it meant that when Michael came back, the door was still cracked open. And Tua had every chance to slam it shut, and he had every chance to say, this is my job. Look at how good I am with this offense, and he didn't do it. So I think you can frame it either way. I don't think it's entirely fair, though, to collectively say that Tua lost the job because, I mean, he's still got a chance to go out and do it head-to-head with Michael now. But I do think he lost out on the chance to cement it when he really had the opportunity to. So I guess we'll see where it goes, right?
Yeah, and he'll have another opportunity on Friday for however long he gets to play. So that gets us to the question, based off of your observation, where things are leaning, reading the tea leaves, all the inside information that the whisper is going on in Flowery Branch, who do you think will be the week 1 starter for the Falcons at quarterback?
Yeah, I think Tua will. If I had to guess right now, I'd say Tua. I just think it's hard to picture a world where Michael Penix doesn't feel comfortable right now to take a hit in the game on Friday night and then turn around in a couple weeks and say, hey, you're going to be our guy week 1, got to be ready for it. I just think there's going to be a little bit of a slow played acclimation to that point where, and I've also been pretty open about this. I think we'll look back at this by the end of the year. They'll both play. They'll both start games. I'm very confident I don't know if it'll be injury. I don't know if it'll be performance. I don't know if it'll just be them having a good time as a staff and saying, hey, why not? Let's try something. I really don't know. But I do think there's a great, great, great chance they both play. So I think with that in mind, and with Michael being very cognizant that this is ACL number 3 and him trying to value the long-term health of his knee, I don't think they're going to rush him back. I think they'll try to let him get more and more comfortable in the 11-on-11 setting and all of that. So I think Tua – and I also think that Tua got a little bit of a bad rap. One of the things that kind of irked me was when he had the practice against the Colts, it was the Wednesday practice, and the Colts reporters said that it was horrific. That specific practice was not pretty in the slightest. What irked me was that one of the big aggregation sites clipped the word horrific and then applied it to Tua's entire training camp. Yeah. Tua has not been that bad in training camp. Tua, honestly, Aaron, going into the Broncos game, Tua was getting significantly better and was looking very much in command. And it's like that game – it kind of spiraled throughout the next week in practice, and then he finally just yesterday started to turn the corner a good bit. So I felt like he was really building, and the staff said they believed he was really, really trending in the right direction. And he just kind of hit a wall. And then you hear things get very mischaracterized, and then it spreads like wildfire that, oh, he's been awful. It really hasn't been that way. So we'll see what he does Friday night in Miami. It's obviously a big test for him. But I don't think that it's as dire of a situation as it's made out to be. I don't think he's been as bad as a lot of people believe. Has he been great? Not particularly. Has he been horrific for the last month? No. So I do think he ends up being the guy week 1 as things stand and where Mike's at in his process.
Well, Daniel, you're disappointing a lot of my audience because the correct answer was Jack Strand. Okay, yeah,
I thought about it. I thought about it just for vibe purposes. Someone told me to log off my account today if I didn't provide another Jack Strand update. Like, okay.
There you go. The people's quarterback. Okay. So maybe we will talk a little bit about the people's quarterback, as we continue today's Locked On Falcons, as we talk about some players and some potential starters that we will have our eyes on in this Dolphins game. Some guys will be making their preseason 2026 debut, and we'll pick Daniel's brain on, who he has his eyes on besides, of course, Jack Strand, and we'll do that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. Support for today's episode comes from Indeed Sponsored Jobs. When workplace chaos hits and you need the right hire, Indeed Sponsored Jobs is going to help connect employers with candidates who match specific needs like the skills, experience, and location, so you can spend less time searching and more time finding the right fit. People are finding quality hires on Indeed right now. In the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours have made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. We know with the quarterback position, one great addition can have a ripple effect to everyone around them. All you have to do is just look at Jack Strand, and he can make the entire group better. And the listeners of the show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium status it deserves by going to Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. So we know that the starters will play against the Miami Dolphins, which will include Tua Tagovailoa as the quarterback. And, depending on varying degrees, how much this guy's going to get, they'll play it by ear. But we should see several Falcon players making their debuts, including potentially Bijan Robinson, Jawaan Taylor, Divine Deablo, potentially Deshaun Hand, Avieon Terrell, Jessie Bates, Xavier Watts. I don't think we're going to see Zadarius Smith. Is that correct, Daniel?
I would tend to believe so, yes. He said he hopes to put pads on next week. So I can't imagine that'll be Friday.
yes. Okay. So that I saw that and I was like, oh, okay. Then he's probably not going to play Friday. So of those guys, or maybe another player that I missed, are there anybody that stands out in particular that you are most eager to see on Friday night?
Yeah, I would say one thing. I don't get the vibe Bijan is going to play. I assumed that he would, considering Kevin said that pretty much all the ones would. And then I asked Bijan about it, and he was playing it very coy, like, well, I guess we'll see. It didn't really seem – it didn't seem to be like, oh, yeah, I can't wait for it and all that stuff. So I'm not sure he will play. But I think Jawaan Taylor, to see him in a game setting will be very interesting. I mean, he's kind of the one guy. Like, you look at, like, Divine Deablo, what Divine Deablo will look like manning the middle of his unit. How guys like that will look. How Bijan will look. I think Avieon Terrell will be fascinating. Avion's gotten a lot of reps with the ones in the slot this week since he came back to team period on Tuesday. And I think him playing in a game is, in my opinion, the next step in him being able to win that slot job. And that's going to be huge. Is how does he look in a game? Can he actually play in the game? How much he's playing the game? And then once you see him do it in a live game setting, you got to be confident, I think, with being able to roll him out there. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that later. But I think seeing Avieon handle it will be interesting. That's one. Then again, I think Jawaan Taylor, how do you do in live game action? How do you do in snaps and everything? And the chemistry, camaraderie, collectively, the offensive line. I think I think that'll be another one. That's how does it build? Because they've done more team snaps this week with that unit than they probably did the entire offseason combined leading into this week. So how much does that unit get to play together? What does the cohesion look like? That's kind of where I'm at with it.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about Avieon Terrell. It sounds like, it feels like to me with Billy Bowman, and unless we get some update in, I guess, the next 48 hours, I'm going to assume that he's going to stay on the PUP list and start the season on the PUP list and miss at least the first 4 games of the season as he recovers. And that decision will be made this weekend when final cuts are made. So he won't be the starting slot corner come week 1 based off of that assumption. And it feels like to me, and Daniel, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it feels like it's either going to be Avieon Terrell or Darnay Holmes. And I think all signs point to they want it to be Avieon Terrell, but I think Darnay Holmes is kind of the insurance policy in the event that maybe Avieon Terrell is still dealing with injuries or really struggles, I guess, on Friday night, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's funny. So I asked Justin Hood, their secondary coach, this afternoon about how much did it hurt Avieon to not be out there the last couple of weeks? And he said, he's banked so many mental reps throughout this whole process, and they've emphasized so much of trying to keep guys mentally engaged that because it was my concern the whole time was Avieon was leveling up throughout the first week and a half of camp to the point where he was getting reps, the ones in the slot. Then he gets hurt. Well, when he comes back, as he missed too much time, the vibe that I got from Hood, and then seeing with my own two eyes, Avieon being their primary nickel with the ones, tells me that he's certainly who they'd like to have out there, and he's certainly the most talented guy in that group. And so, yeah, I do think Avieon ends up being the week one nickel, barring some type of late development, like he's rough on Friday night or whatever. But even that, I think there's a good chance that he plays. And I certainly think that they've always wanted to find a way to get him on the field right away. And you look at who else is in that room around him. There's not really a guy there that you would Avieon off the field because you want to play him so bad. And I think Holmes had a pretty decent training camp. He's certainly extremely confident and loves to talk, which that vibe in a nickel, I love that. I want my nickel to have that if I'm a defensive coordinator. But I think Holmes is in good shape to make the roster, but I don't necessarily think that it'll be as the starter in the slot, which is probably what I would have predicted a week ago. But seeing Avieon be able to come back and immediately immerse himself back in with the ones implies to me that he'll probably end up handling that role right away.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit more about the rest of these rookies, including Kendal Daniels and Zachariah Branch. But are there any other position or roster battles that you think could be decided on Friday night against the Dolphins?
Yeah, I think cornerback is super, super interesting. I think the numbers, they've got 8 guys in that room who've played 3+ years in the NFL to go along with guys like Kobe Bryant, like Avieon Terrell, guys like, young guys who have either played or you expect to play early on this year. So it's really a deep, deep room in terms of proven bodies and guys that can play. And I think how you perform in the preseason, how you do, who's rotation-wise, who's up right away. I look at Clark Phillips. I think C.J. Henderson. Those are 2 guys I think will be on the roster, but kind of have one more test to clear here. They're an interesting case study, I think. I think Mike Ford, you'd expect to be on the roster for his team's value, but then do you carry 7 cornerbacks? Do you carry 6? What do you do there? The offensive line, Wanya Morris, I don't think is safe by any means. What happens at guard? I've seen Kyle Hinton walking around with a leg brace on the last few days. Is he healthy? If he's not healthy, you got to carry another guard. It's going to be super interesting to see how that all plays out, because I think the numbers and who they carry, I think at offensive line, outside linebacker, inside linebacker from like 4 on down, and then corner are kind of where I go. I think linebacker, kind of a very, very in-depth and kind of sicko conversation, but like linebacker 5 could be a fascinating one. Is it Josh Woods? Is it JD Bertrand? There's plenty of guys that they have. Is it Channing Tindall? There's guys that you can carry it. I would give it to Josh Woods right now. Like, it's one of those deals where I think who makes the most tackles on teams will be interesting. Can you make an impact on teams and say, hey, guys, I can play on teams right away? Like, it's going to be – that's where I go with it. I think the tackle situation will be interesting. Onianwa, Jarrell, Wanya Morris. There's a lot. I think they'll go into the game knowing probably about 40 to 45 of the guys on their roster, and then the last 8 are still going to be trying to compete for jobs. So it'll be intense in that regard for sure.
Okay. Well, let's have that sicko conversation about linebacker, but instead we'll talk about, the probably 2 out of the top 4 guys in Kendal Daniels and Harold Perkins. And I've been operating under the assumption that Daniels will start next to Divine Deablo come week 1, but I want to hear if you agree or disagree with that notion, and we'll do that as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. Running a business shouldn't feel like you're trying to connect a bunch of systems that were never designed to work together. And that's where Odoo comes in, the all-in-one business management software that brings every part of your business together in one powerful platform. From sales and accounting to inventory and marketing, everything works in one place, helping your team move faster, stay organized, and focus on growing the business instead of managing software. The best organizations know that success just isn't about talent. It's about having everyone working towards the same goal. And that's true in sports, just like it is in business. And if the goal is winning games, then Jack Strand is basically that. And he is essentially Odoo. Great organizations win because operations matter, and that's why you should get Odoo. Try for free today at odoo.com/locked-on. That's odoo.com/locked-on. So like I said, is Kendal Daniels locked up that starting spot next to Divine Deablo, or is it still up for grabs? And who do you think is in the mix? Harold Perkins, Christian Harris, JD Bertrand?
People would hate if I said JD Bertrand, wouldn't they?
I know.
No.
It's the opposite of saying Jack Strand.
Yeah, I don't think that linebacker position in general, you're going to see a lot of rotation between Kendal and Harold. That's what I think it'll come down to. I don't think Christian Harris is in much contention to start anymore. The way I think it'll go is Kendal and Harold, they have not been on the field together with Divine, to my recollection, at any point this week, which is when Divine really began being a part of a team drill in earnest post-injury. I think what they're going to do is Kendall's gotten a little bit of reps as like an edge, like a stand-up, like 2-point stance edge the last couple of days at times. He's also been more your regular off-ball linebacker. Perkins has done a lot more your will stuff and playing in space, dropping coverage, and also kind of aligning in various spots over offensive linemen and rushing the passer. I think they're going to mix and match those guys. I'm not entirely sure how they're going to handle it from like a personnel grouping and what down they're going to want guys in there on. But my glean from it is just what they've done this week is it feels like they're changing just about every couple plays. And so I think that's more of where it is. I think Kendal long term, if they're not able to keep Divine after this year, Kendal kind of takes over that role. Obviously depends on what kind of year that he has, but so I think the spot next to Divine, you're more so you're just kind of complimenting, right? And so it's who do you want on this package? Who do you want on this package? I think they're both going to play. I think they're both going to play a lot. So I would imagine, I'd estimate the last couple of days, the snap count between Harold and Kendal has been very, very even. Kendall's made a lot of plays. Harold's made a lot of plays. And what Harold and Kendal do obviously isn't the same. And they're built so differently that how Jeff Ulbrich wants to utilize those guys will be fascinating.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I kind of been operating, Daniels is more the every down guy and Perkins is kind of the, sub package, I guess. Like we want to really focus what you do really well, use that speed on passing downs, particularly as a rusher and all those various things. And I think we've seen glimpses of that usage in the preseason. I know against the Colts, like with Bertrand starting the game at will linebacker, but the minute the Falcons went to their first nickel sub package, it was Perkins in the game. So that's kind of been what I've been assuming for that position group. I want to talk a little bit about Zachariah Branch as well. He had a hot start to training camp, and it's like the hype has cooled. And I don't want to assume that means that he hasn't been performing in practice the ways that he was doing early on. But what is behind why we haven't been getting our daily dose of sweet Zachariah Branch highlights?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's been circumstantial to a degree. So, like, you go back to Wednesday, last joint practice, because I think prior to, like, joint practice week or so, the stock was obviously really, really high with Zachariah. So you go back to joint practice week, and the Wednesday practice is when Atlanta couldn't move the football by any means offensively. Just really a rough showing. Zachariah probably had the only highlight. Him and Drake had two highlight plays where Zachariah is, like, lowering the shoulder. But apart from that, it was screens, underneath stuff. The next day, he had a couple underneath, if memory serves. He won, from what I saw, every single one-on-one rep that he took in Indy against the Colts corners. So, obviously, that is heavily in his advantage and all that stuff. But it's not like he was getting clamped or, whatever. And then came out, had a nice opening drive against Indy with Cooper Rush. I think he caught Atlanta's first two targets, if my memory is correct.
That's correct.
And so I would also add that the first ball that he caught was like a 15-yard comeback or an out route, whatever it might have been, where it was like, okay, so you can do a little bit of the route tree. And I think this week's been interesting because they've started to do more of like a scout type of week where they were trying to install and like replicate a season, like a normal week in season. So they were doing a lot of scout stuff. And one of the other things that I kind of think about it too is Zachariah hasn't repped with the twos as much anymore either. And so you got to remember that Zachariah was doing a lot of his early damage facing backup corners and and still beating ones at times when they rotated in like that. But his snap count in my eyes has probably collectively dropped a little bit because now they're using him with the ones and he's only being used in the packages that he'll be used in season and all that. So I do think Zachariah has still been impressive. He has not been as productive. I think he'll still probably end training camp. I'll go through and count this up after, but probably in the top 5 for reception leaders, which is pretty impressive when you think about the guys that are working with the 2s, with the 3s that are kind of dominating those target shares and whatnot. So, yeah, I think collectively Zachariah had a good summer. They're very excited about him. It kind of seems like he's reached the point in his maturation process where the plays that he made early on that everybody got so excited about is more of the norm with him a little bit. But It's also a lot of what he's done has been screen passes, and they're starting to really hammer, I think, hone in on this is what your role is going to be too. So
okay, all right. Well, that's not necessarily music to some people's ears because they thought Georgia overdid it with the screens last year. So we'll see how the Falcons, get that going. They haven't been able to get it quite going in the preseason, at least from the screen standpoint. So we'll see if they get an opportunity to do that on Friday. But it's good to know that, he was just cooking all these shrimps and it's just become so normal that it's just like, okay, yeah, it's routine. Yeah, of course he's, sauteing all these corners in lemon and butter and all that stuff.
I would add as well, too, their screen game collectively has been very, very prominent, like extremely. And even Bijan mentioned that today, that they're doing more screens. They've got more screen concepts as well. So, yeah, we'll see how much it works. They've also been experimenting with like an end-around concept with Zachariah.
Okay.
At this point, I might call it 0 for 4. I've yet to see it deliver the results I think they're open for. But they're trying to get creative with it. They're trying to find ways to get him the ball at a very quick hit manner, I think. And they do believe there's more in his route tree that he can do. And I think they're going to let him tap into it a little bit. But I also think that they like Jawaan, they like OZ, and they're going to kind of lean more on those guys to run the routes. And they'll let Zachariah have all the run after catch fun.
Yeah. I've kind of been operating under that assumption, but then we got the highlights, and I was like, oh, okay, maybe it's going to be, but I do think it's probably going to be you have your main 3 guys in your quote unquote base offense, and then you kind of use Branch as an extension of the run game with the screens, the end arounds, the jet sweeps, all that sort of stuff, and then you just kind of slowly incorporate him more as a quote unquote normal wide receiver, and hopefully by the end of the season, he'll be able to do it all and all that sort of stuff. So that's my hope. But I was just like, I haven't gotten my fix on Zachariah Branch highlights these last week or so since joint practices. And I'm just like, I need a little bit more. So I'm glad you, provided some context to why we haven't been getting the same dosage these past few days. But last rookie to talk about is Ethan Onianwa. Safe to say that he's on the roster? Because I know that was a big question mark going into the summer, but then you had the not so great performance against Denver, and then I think a much better performance against the Colts. Do you feel like he's solidified a roster spot?
I feel confident that he has. I'm not sure I'd say 100% certain, but I feel confident he's in good shape. I think the thing Ethan has working for him, especially depending on Kyle Hinton's health, is you got a guy there that can play tackle and can play guard, and I think that's going to be very, very helpful for him, is the fact that you look and he can play left and right tackle. He can do them both. He can play guard. I think that flexibility is going to really help. And this is something I find kind of interesting about Ethan. He might be James Pierce Jr.'s kryptonite. Like, I'm not sure that I've seen James beat him in a one-on-one rep. And Ethan, it's very impressive. You see James go against their tackles and he routinely wins reps. And Ethan's kind of got his numbers. So, I've been impressed by Ethan. I think he's made – a couple of us were actually talking about this yesterday, but you can visibly see Ethan improving and really getting better. So I think he's in pretty good shape, yeah.
Okay. Well, my last question for you, Daniel, is just because we haven't heard anything about him, so I was just hoping maybe you got some insight into it. But is there any updates on Ontario Thompson's status? Is he going to come back this season at any point?
I still haven't physically seen Ontario Thompson. So I was actually talking to somebody about this at training camp a couple weeks ago. We talked to Ontario after the draft on Zoom. And apart from that, Ontario's been in the building. Like, he's been around the team and in meetings and all that stuff, but he physically hasn't been on the practice field, which is super interesting because everybody else who's hurt or whatever, you can see him coming back. And so he's still on NFI. his season's not over. He can still be activated off of NFI and can still return to play. But when I asked Kevin Stefanski about it a couple weeks ago, he just said they're still working through that. He did not care to add any additional context as to what they're working through. So could be a little bit of on-field stuff with injuries and whatnot. It could be a little bit of obviously he had that kind of cryptic post online a couple weeks ago that made people think maybe there was more to it. I've reached out to so many people and I've hit a dead end. So I've tried. I've exhausted a lot of resources into trying, and I got nothing. It's legitimately, it's dumbfounding.
Okay, so no breaking news on Ontario Thompson here on Locked On Falcons, but Daniel, I do appreciate your insight into this team, this training camp. Anything you want to plug before we get out of here?
We're gonna have a busy couple hours here on AJC.com, so that's where I'll send people. We're going to have a lot of good stuff. Roster projection. Got some cool things. One that we're going to run a couple of days here about Clark Phillips is kind of neat. He was recruited by Jeff Hafley, who's Miami's head coach now, to go to Ohio State, play corner. He was going to play corner at Ohio State, and then Hafley left to be the head coach at Boston College. Clark decommitted, went to Utah. Now Clark's trying to win a job. Who does he face? Jeff Hafley. Kind of a neat story. So we'll have that up probably Friday morning, I think is the plan. So a lot of good stuff happening over there, but really happy to hop on with you whenever, Aaron. Always a good time, and really appreciate the invite.
So, guys, that's going to do it for us here on today's Locked On Falcons. Thanks to Daniel Flick. We'll be back tomorrow with more content from Jarvis Davis, potentially a breakdown of the 53-man roster, as well as get some added insight into Zachariah Branch from Matt Waldman. So that's all in store for you between now and when the Falcons kick off Friday night against the Miami Dolphins. So you don't want to miss it. For your second listen, check out the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast, where you'll get scoops on how high you should take Zachariah Branch in your upcoming fantasy draft and why he is going to win you your league. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.